Midnight, December 16th, 1773. 3 British merchant ships sit silently in Boston Harbor, unaware they are about to be thrust into one of the most pivotal acts of rebellion in American history. Dozens of men, disguised as Mohawk warriors, are preparing to strike. They don't carry weapons. They carry tomahawks and a message. Tonight, they won't spill blood. They'll spill tea. This is the story of the Boston Tea Party, a carefully planned protest that electrified a revolution, challenged an empire, and forever changed the course of a continent. To understand the Boston Tea Party, we need to rewind. The colonies didn't rise up overnight. Decades of frustration, resentment, and injustice led to that explosive moment on Boston Harbor. In the 1760s, the American colonies were still loyal to the British Crown, but tensions were rising. Britain had just emerged victorious from the 7 Years' War, known in America as the French and Indian War. Victory came at a high cost, both in lives and in pounds. To pay off the enormous war debt and maintain British troops in North America, Parliament looked to the colonies. The solution? Taxation. In 1765, the Stamp Act was passed. It required colonists to buy a stamp for every printed document. Newspapers, legal papers, even playing cards. The response? Furious protests and the birth of a new slogan: no taxation without representation. The Stamp Act was repealed a year later due to overwhelming opposition, but the damage was done. Trust was eroding. A pattern had begun. Parliament imposed a tax, the colonies protested. The Townshend Acts of 1767 added taxes on imported goods like glass, lead, and tea. Boycotts spread across the colonies. British soldiers arrived in Boston to enforce the laws and keep order. Then came the spark, the Boston Massacre. On March 5, 1770, British soldiers fired into a crowd of colonists. 5 men died. The event was quickly seized upon by patriots like Paul Revere and Samuel Adams, who used it to fan the flames of resistance. Though most Townshend duties were repealed, one remained: the tea tax, symbolic, insulting, and soon to be the center of a storm. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. To many in Britain, it seemed like a simple solution to a financial problem. The East India Company was drowning in unsold tea. The act allowed the company to sell directly to the colonies, bypassing middlemen and offering tea at a lower price. But there was a catch. The tax was still there. For colonial merchants, this was an economic threat. For colonial patriots, it was a political insult. The lower price was a trap, meant to make colonists accept Parliament's right to tax them. It was the velvet glove hiding the iron fist. Samuel Adams and other members of the Sons of Liberty saw through the disguise. To them, this wasn't about tea. It was about sovereignty. Public meetings erupted across the colonies. In Charleston, tea was seized and stored. In New York and Philadelphia, ships carrying tea were turned away. But in Boston, things were different. Governor Thomas Hutchinson, a Loyalist and Crown official, refused to let the tea ships leave without unloading and paying the tax. 3 ships arrived: the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. The clock started ticking. By law, if the tea wasn't unloaded or returned in 20 days, the ships could be seized and their cargo forcibly landed, with the tax collected. The deadline? December 17th, 1773. As the deadline approached, Boston became a city on edge. Meetings were held almost daily at Faneuil Hall and the Old South Meeting House. Thousands attended, debating, demanding, organizing. Leaders of the Sons of Liberty, including Samuel Adams, Paul Revere, and Dr. Joseph Warren, coordinated with merchants and dock workers. They made one thing clear: the tea would not be allowed to land. On December 16th, more than 5,000 people, roughly a third of Boston's population, gathered at the Old South Meeting House. Tensions were high. The deadline was mere hours away. A final plea was made to the governor to allow the ships to leave. Hutchinson refused. As darkness fell, a signal was given, possibly by Adams himself. A war whoop rang out from the gallery. "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." It was time. That night, 30 to 130 men, estimates vary, disguised themselves as Mohawk warriors. The disguise served a purpose: symbolic anonymity and a connection to native resistance and freedom. In organized groups, they marched to Griffin's Wharf. Armed with axes, mallets, and lanterns, they boarded the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver without resistance. The crews had been instructed not to interfere. Working swiftly and silently, they opened 342 chests of tea, over 92,000 pounds, and dumped it into the harbor. The operation took about 3 hours. No property other than the tea was damaged. No one was hurt. The men even swept the decks clean before they left. Boston Harbor literally ran brown with tea. As the tide rose, the tea sank, and history changed. When news of the Tea Party reached London, the response was swift and merciless. Parliament was outraged. So was King George III, who saw the event as open rebellion. In 1774, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, which the colonies called the Intolerable Acts. Boston Harbor was closed until the tea was paid for. The Massachusetts Charter was revoked. Town meetings were restricted. British officials accused of crimes could be tried in England. Troops could be housed in colonial homes. The punishment was meant to isolate and weaken Boston. It had the opposite effect. Colonies from Virginia to South Carolina sent aid. Newspapers fanned the flames of sympathy. Militias began training. Networks of resistance grew stronger. That same year, in September 1774, colonial leaders gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. It was the first united political response, a declaration that the colonies would resist tyranny. The Boston Tea Party wasn't the largest protest. No one died. But its impact was seismic. It galvanized a people. It drew clear lines between liberty and control, protest and obedience. It forced colonists to ask a dangerous question: are we subjects of a king or citizens of a new nation? By April 1775, that question would be answered at Lexington and Concord, where the first shots of the American Revolutionary War were fired. The Tea Party also shaped American political culture. It showed the power of civil disobedience, peaceful, symbolic, and deeply provocative. Today, the Boston Tea Party lives on as a symbol of defiance against tyranny. It reminds us that history isn't made by monarchs or parliaments alone, but by ordinary people, taking extraordinary action. Thanks for watching Age of Uprising. If this story moved you, if you learned something new, subscribe for more deep dives into the battles, ideas, and people who shaped the fight for American independence. What Revolutionary War moment should we explore next? The Battle of Lexington? The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere? Leave your ideas in the comments. Until next time, remember, revolutions don't begin in palaces. They begin in meeting halls, on harbor docks, and in the hearts of those brave enough to say, "Enough."